Stop whatever you are doing, because what you are about to hear is not a drill, not a simulation, and not the kind of geopolitical speculation that gets walked back by morning. In the last 72 hours, the State of Israel has experienced the single most catastrophic failure of defensive architecture in the history of modern warfare. 150 hypersonic warheads, each traveling at speeds exceeding Mach 15, have successfully penetrated what was once considered the most sophisticated layered air defense network ever constructed. The Iron Dome, David's Sling, and Arrow systems, which have consumed over $18 billion in American and Israeli defense investment over the past 2 decades, have been rendered operationally irrelevant in a single coordinated strike sequence that lasted less than 11 minutes. The weapon system that achieved this unprecedented defensive penetration is Iran's Fattah Hypersonic ballistic missile, a maneuvering re-entry vehicle employing terminal phase guidance that Israeli defense planners publicly dismissed as propaganda less than 6 months ago. The number of successful impacts across Tel Aviv, Haifa, and strategic military installations throughout central Israel exceeds the total number of successful intercepts achieved by the entire Israeli air defense network during the engagement. This is not incremental degradation of defensive capability. This is complete systematic failure of the fundamental strategic assumption upon which Israeli national security has rested for the past generation. Tonight's analysis takes you inside every dimension of this event. The technical capabilities that made this penetration possible. The operational failures that allowed defensive saturation on this scale. The strategic calculations in Tehran that prompted this demonstration. The immediate consequences facing Israeli decision-makers who must now operate without the defensive umbrella they have relied upon for decades. And the broader implications for regional power balance as every actor from Riyadh to Ankara reassesses their strategic positioning in light of what Iran has just proven it can do. If this channel has been giving you the analysis that cuts through the noise of official narratives and mainstream defense commentary, now is the moment to make sure you never miss an update. Subscribe, hit the notification bell, and share this video with everyone in your network who is serious about understanding what is actually happening at the sharp edge of global power competition. What you are about to hear will not appear in sanitized Pentagon briefings or carefully managed Israeli military spokesman statements. This is the unfiltered strategic reality that defense establishments on 3 continents are confronting right now in emergency classified sessions. The strike sequence began at 0347 local time with the simultaneous launch of 195 Fattah hypersonic missiles from hardened underground facilities across western Iran. The launch sites, distributed across a 500-kilometer arc from Kermanshah to Khuzestan province, activated in coordinated sequence, timed to create overlapping terminal phase arrival windows that would overwhelm Israeli defensive tracking and intercept capabilities. The missiles followed depressed ballistic trajectories optimized to minimize radar detection time while maximizing terminal velocity at impact. The Fattah represents a fundamental evolution in Iranian ballistic missile technology, incorporating maneuvering re-entry vehicle capabilities that transform the terminal phase engagement geometry in ways that render conventional intercept systems operationally ineffective. Unlike traditional ballistic missiles that follow predictable parabolic trajectories, allowing defensive systems to calculate intercept solutions during mid-course phase, the Fattah employs active terminal guidance with lateral displacement authority exceeding 40 kilometers at hypersonic velocity. The Israeli Defense Network detected the launches within 90 seconds of motor ignition, triggering automated alert sequences across the integrated air defense architecture. Arrow 3 exo-atmospheric interceptors launched first, attempting to engage the incoming warheads during mid-course phase above 80 kilometers altitude. Of 37 Arrow 3 missiles fired, only 4 achieved successful intercepts against non-maneuvering warheads. The remaining Fattah missiles initiated evasive maneuvers upon detecting the radar emissions associated with Arrow fire control systems, executing lateral displacements that defeated the intercept geometry. As the warhead stream descended through 50 kilometers altitude, Arrow 2 endo-atmospheric interceptors engaged, firing 62 missiles against the remaining inbound threats. The intercept rate degraded further as the Fattah warheads accelerated through terminal phase, reaching velocities exceeding Mach 15 while simultaneously executing random lateral jinking patterns. Arrow 2 achieved 11 successful intercepts, reducing the inbound threat stream by less than 6%. David's Sling medium-range interceptors activated as the warheads descended below 35 kilometers, representing the third layer of the defensive network. 89 David's Sling missiles launched in rapid succession, emptying magazines at 3 primary battery locations. The intercept rate collapsed to near zero as the Fattah warheads executed maximum displacement maneuvers in terminal phase, presenting radar cross-sections and velocity vectors that fell outside the intercept envelope parameters that David's sling was designed to handle. Iron Dome batteries across Tel Aviv and Haifa activated as the final defensive layer, cycling through intercept sequences as fast as reload times permitted. The system was never designed to engage hypersonic ballistic missiles, having been optimized against subsonic rockets and artillery shells. Against warheads traveling at Mach 15 in terminal phase, Iron Dome's intercept probability approached zero. 123 Iron Dome interceptors fired. 0 successful intercepts achieved. The warheads began impacting at 0358, 11 minutes after initial launch detection. The first wave struck Israeli Air Force Base Ramat David, destroying hardened aircraft shelters, fuel storage facilities, and runway infrastructure. Satellite imagery confirmed at least 19 F-35I Adair aircraft destroyed on the ground, representing over $4 billion in airframe losses alone. The second wave targeted the Kiryat military headquarters complex in central Tel Aviv, obliterating command and control facilities that coordinate Israeli Defense Forces operations across all theaters. Subsequent waves struck electrical infrastructure, including the Hadera power station and primary transformer substations serving Tel Aviv metropolitan area. Others impacted the Haifa port facility, destroying container terminals and petroleum storage tanks. Several warheads struck the Palmachim Air Base, home to Israel's Jericho ballistic missile force and reconnaissance satellite operations. The precision of the targeting demonstrates intelligence preparation that identified and prioritized critical nodes across Israel's military and strategic infrastructure. The human cost remains uncertain as Israeli authorities have imposed complete information blackout on casualty figures. Unconfirmed reports from hospital sources in Tel Aviv suggest casualty numbers reaching into the thousands, with medical facilities overwhelmed by trauma cases. The Israeli government has mobilized all reserve medical units and requested emergency medical supplies from the United States. What makes this strike unprecedented is not merely the scale of physical destruction, but the complete failure of defensive systems that were supposed to make such destruction impossible. Israel has invested $18 billion over 20 years constructing a layered air defense network specifically designed to provide umbrella protection against ballistic missile attack. That network was tested under real combat conditions against the most challenging threat it was designed to defeat, and it failed catastrophically. The Iron Dome has achieved intercept rates exceeding 90% against rockets and artillery shells in previous conflicts. Against hypersonic maneuvering reentry vehicles, the intercept rate was 0%. David's sling was designed specifically to engage medium-range ballistic missiles. Against the Fattah, it achieved intercept rates below 2%. Aero systems represent Israel's most advanced exoatmospheric and endoatmospheric intercept capabilities, incorporating technology transfer from American missile defense programs. Against maneuvering hypersonic warheads, Aero's intercept rate was approximately 8%. These numbers represent complete defensive failure. A layered network deploying over 300 interceptors against less than 200 inbound warheads should theoretically achieve intercept rates exceeding 60% even against challenging targets. The actual intercept rate across all defensive layers combined was approximately 7%. 93% of the warheads that survived initial Arrow 3 engagement reached their targets successfully. The technical reality that enabled this penetration is straightforward. Maneuvering reentry vehicles executing lateral displacement at hypersonic velocity present intercept geometry problems that current interceptor technology cannot reliably solve. The intercept solution requires predicting the future position of a target that is actively maneuvering to defeat that prediction. The computational challenge is compounded by the time compression inherent in hypersonic engagement, with decision cycles measured in seconds against targets that can displace laterally by tens of kilometers during those seconds. The Patriot system, which the United States has deployed across the Middle East and which represents American theater missile defense capability, faces identical limitations against hypersonic maneuvering threats. The Terminal High Altitude Area Defense System THAAD, which represents the highest tier American intercept capability against ballistic threats, was designed and optimized against non-maneuvering re-entry vehicles following predictable trajectories. Against maneuvering hypersonic warheads, THAAD's intercept probability degrades to levels comparable to what Aero systems just demonstrated. This means the defensive architecture that Israel and the United States have constructed across the Middle East, consuming over $40 billion in combined investment, has been rendered obsolete by Iranian hypersonic technology that Tehran developed over the past 8 years, while Western intelligence agencies dismissed Iranian claims as propaganda and exaggeration. The operational implications extend far beyond a single strike event. Israeli military planning has assumed for 2 decades that layered air defense provides reliable protection for strategic infrastructure, military installations, and population centers against ballistic missile attack. This assumption has shaped force structure, basing decisions, mobilization procedures, and offensive operational concepts. That assumption is now proven false. Israeli Air Force operations assume that air bases will remain functional during conflicts, allowing sustained sortie generation for offensive strikes and defensive patrols. The Ramat David strike demonstrates that Iranian hypersonic missiles can destroy airbase infrastructure faster than it can be repaired, rendering sustained air operations impossible. An air force that cannot generate sorties from secure bases is an air force that cannot project power. Israeli offensive planning assumes the capability to conduct deep strikes against Iranian nuclear facilities, military infrastructure, and leadership targets. Those strike packages require aerial refueling aircraft, electronic warfare platforms, and fighter bombers operating in coordinated sequences over extended durations. If Iranian hypersonic missiles can destroy Israeli air bases whenever Tehran chooses, the platforms required for deep strike operations cannot be maintained in operational status. The offensive capability that Israeli deterrence theory relies upon has been neutralized by defensive vulnerability. Israeli mobilization procedures assume that reserve forces will have time to activate and deploy before hostile forces can inflict decisive damage. If Iranian hypersonic strikes can destroy mobilization centers, equipment depots, and transportation infrastructure within the first hours of conflict, the reserve system cannot function as designed. The military mass that Israel relies upon to offset numerical inferiority requires time to mobilize. Iran has just demonstrated it can deny that time. The cost-exchange ratios make the situation worse. Each Fattah missile costs Iran approximately $2 million to produce. Each Iron Dome interceptor costs Israel $80,000. Each David Sling interceptor costs $1 million. Each Arrow interceptor costs $3 million. Israel fired over 300 interceptors at a cost exceeding $600 million. Iran launched 195 missiles at a cost of approximately $400 million. The economic exchange favors the attacker by substantial margins, and that calculation does not include the cost of replacing destroyed infrastructure and military equipment. If Iran can impose $600 million in interception costs plus additional billions in infrastructure damage while expending $400 million in missiles, the economic sustainability of extended conflict shifts decisively. Israel cannot afford to replace interceptor magazines at the rate required to defend against sustained hypersonic strikes. Iran can afford to produce and launch Fattah missiles faster than Israel can afford to intercept them. The United States maintains strategic interceptor stockpiles that could theoretically replenish Israeli defensive magazines, but those stockpiles are finite and are committed to defending American interests globally. Every interceptor transferred to Israel is an interceptor unavailable for defending American forces in the Pacific, Europe, or the Middle East. Washington faces impossible allocation decisions about where scarce defensive resources get prioritized when multiple allies face simultaneous threats. Israeli decision-makers now confront strategic choices that have no satisfactory answers. They can attempt to destroy Iranian hypersonic launch capabilities through preemptive strikes, but Iranian missiles are deployed in hardened underground facilities distributed across terrain that makes targeting extremely difficult. Strike operations sufficient to neutralize Iranian launch capabilities would require sustained air campaigns, consuming weeks of intensive operations with no guarantee of success. They can attempt to develop new defensive technologies capable of intercepting hypersonic maneuvering threats, but the physics problems inherent in hypersonic intercept are fundamental rather than engineering challenges that additional investment can solve. The United States has spent over 15 years attempting to develop reliable hypersonic defense capabilities and has not fielded operationally effective systems. They can attempt to restore deterrence through nuclear escalation threats, but Iran has now demonstrated conventional capabilities sufficient to inflict strategic damage without requiring nuclear weapons. Threatening nuclear retaliation against conventional attacks creates escalation dynamics that risk civilizational destruction, and Tehran knows that Washington will exert enormous pressure on Jerusalem to avoid nuclear use except under existential threat circumstances. They can accept strategic vulnerability and attempt to manage Iranian behavior through diplomatic arrangements, but accepting vulnerability fundamentally transforms the regional power balance and undermines the deterrence credibility that Israeli security strategy has relied upon for 70 years. None of these options restore the strategic situation that existed 72 hours ago. Israel operated under the assumption that its defensive umbrella made it invulnerable to conventional ballistic missile attack. That assumption is destroyed. The operational freedom that assumption provided is gone. The deterrence credibility that assumption supported is compromised. The strategic landscape has fundamentally changed, and there is no option that restores the previous status quo. Regional actors are watching these events and drawing conclusions about power distribution and alliance reliability. Saudi Arabia maintained quiet security cooperation with Israel, premised on the assumption that Israeli military capability provided useful counterweight to Iranian regional ambitions. If Israel cannot defend its own territory against Iranian strikes, what value does Israeli partnership provide to Riyadh? The Abraham Accords normalized relations based partly on Israeli military strength. If that strength is revealed as vulnerable, the strategic logic supporting normalization weakens. Turkey has been conducting increasingly independent foreign policy, positioning itself as a regional power broker. If Israel appears strategically vulnerable, Ankara's calculations about how to position itself between Western alliance structures and regional power centers shift further toward independent action. Every actor pursuing hedging strategies now sees reduced risk in distancing themselves from Washington and Jerusalem. The United States faces cascading credibility challenges across multiple theaters. American security guarantees to allies worldwide rest on the assumption that American military technology provides decisive advantages over adversary capabilities. Iran just demonstrated that its domestically developed hypersonic missiles can defeat American-supplied defensive systems deployed by America's closest Middle Eastern ally. Every ally watching these events is reassessing whether American security guarantees retain credibility when American defensive technology proves ineffective against adversary offense. What happens in Taipei as defense planners assess whether American defensive commitments can protect Taiwan against Chinese ballistic missile capabilities? What happens in Seoul as military strategists evaluate whether American defensive architecture can shield South Korea from North Korean hypersonic threats? What happens in Warsaw as Polish security officials question whether NATO missile defenses can protect Eastern European allies from Russian hypersonic systems? The erosion of confidence in American defensive technology cascades into broader questions about alliance relationships, strategic autonomy, and whether alignment with Washington provides security or merely makes nations targets for adversaries who have developed capabilities to defeat American defenses. Russia and China are watching these events with strategic satisfaction. Beijing has invested heavily in hypersonic weapons development, specifically to create capabilities that can defeat American defensive systems. Iran's successful penetration of Israeli defenses validates the strategic logic driving Chinese hypersonic programs. If Iran can defeat American defensive technology using domestically developed systems, China's more advanced hypersonic capabilities certainly can. Moscow has deployed hypersonic systems, including the Kinjal air-launched ballistic missile, an avant-garde hypersonic glide vehicle, specifically to neutralize American and NATO missile defenses in Europe. Iran's demonstration reinforces Russian confidence that NATO's defensive architecture provides no reliable protection against Russian hypersonic strike capabilities. The deterrence calculations that shape NATO-Russia confrontation in Eastern Europe shift when both sides understand that defensive systems cannot reliably intercept offensive hypersonic weapons. The broader pattern is unmistakable. The unipolar moment during which American military technology provided decisive advantages that allowed Washington to project power globally without serious challenge is ending. Not through American withdrawal, but through adversary technological development that neutralizes American advantages. Hypersonic weapons, advanced air defense systems, anti-ship ballistic missiles, and cyber capabilities are creating A2AD environments where American forces cannot operate with the freedom they enjoyed for 3 decades. Iran represents a mid-tier regional power that Western intelligence agencies consistently underestimated. If Iran can develop hypersonic capabilities sufficient to defeat the most advanced defensive systems that American technology can provide, what does that imply about capabilities available to Russia and China? The technology gap that provided American dominance is closing faster than defense establishments in Washington acknowledged. This night represents a turning point that will be studied for generations. The assumptions that have structured Middle Eastern security architecture for 2 decades have been invalidated by 11 minutes of hypersonic strike operations. The defensive umbrella is gone. The operational freedom is gone. The strategic confidence is gone. What replaces these elements remains uncertain, but what is certain is that the previous order is finished. If you want analysis this sharp, this deep, this willing to challenge official narratives, subscribe now to ensure you never miss an update. The geopolitical landscape is shifting faster than mainstream commentary can process, and understanding what is actually happening requires analysis that refuses to accept official narratives at face value. The world woke up to a different Middle East. Israel faces strategic vulnerability it has not experienced since the early years of statehood. Iran has demonstrated capabilities that fundamentally alter regional power balance. American security guarantees appear less credible when American defensive technology fails catastrophically. Regional actors are reassessing their strategic positioning in light of new realities. The unipolar order continues its erosion as mid-tier powers demonstrate capabilities to challenge American military dominance. Subscribe to this channel because in a world this dangerous, analysis this sharp is not optional, it is necessary. Share this with everyone in your network who needs to understand what is actually at stake. The conventional wisdom is collapsing in real time. The official narratives are disconnected from operational reality. The strategic assumptions that shape decades of policy are being invalidated by technological developments that defense establishments fail to anticipate. What comes next depends on decisions being made right now in classified sessions across multiple capitals. Does Israel attempt to restore deterrence through escalation? Does Washington recommit to defending an ally whose vulnerability has been exposed? Does Iran press its advantage by demonstrating additional capabilities? Does the region slide toward wider conflict as actors maneuver for position in the emerging order? Has this night permanently altered the Middle Eastern power balance, or will Washington and Jerusalem find a way to reassert dominance? Your engagement keeps this work independent and sharp. Stay sharp, stay ahead, and never stop asking the questions that matter, because the answers are being written right now in the strategic decisions that will shape the next generation of global power competition.